There's an attitude about pigs that they're disgusting, they're just dirty creatures, and they kind of just want them dead. And I've talked to people that go helicopter hunting, and I go, well, what do you do with all the pigs? And they're like, you leave them there. And I'm like, what?
There is a piece of trail camera footage out of Blanco County, Texas, and the before and after it captured is genuinely brutal. For 5 years, this land got hit with everything: traps, helicopters, federal money, and the after was always the same. The hogs came back, and they came back smarter. Then, 14 seconds into one ordinary infrared clip, something walks into the frame that has no business being there. It is not a hog, it is not a hunter.
United States. It was brought over some 500 years ago as a livestock species, and as they progressed across the United States, some of them were just trickled out and left along the way as they moved around the country, and now we have an unchecked population that's out there on the landscape to breed and to do what they do.
And once you see what it does out there in the dark, you will understand why nobody could explain it: the invasion. The mistake that started all of this was made 5 centuries ago, and nobody ever corrected it. Spanish explorers working their way along the Gulf Coast in the 1500s released domestic pigs into the wild as a living food reserve. The logic was clean enough on paper: leave the animals, come back when supplies run thin, collect what you need. What they never accounted for is that pigs are adaptable, intelligent, and built for survival in a way that turns dangerous the moment nothing is left to contain them. Those animals walked into the forest, and they did not stop walking. They spread across the continent over generations, breeding with no natural ceiling on their numbers. By the time anyone grasped the scale of it,
we cannot manage that population much like what we would do with our domestic livestock populations. We're not attempting to do something that's not already being done in other populations across the country and across the world.
It was no longer containable. They were everywhere. Then the second wave arrived. In the early 1900s, wealthy sportsmen began importing Eurasian wild boar into the United States for the express purpose of hunting them. These were animals shaped over centuries by rough terrain and real predators. Lean, aggressive, fast, durable in ways a barnyard animal never needed to be. When those boar escaped their enclosures, and they always found a way out, they ran straight into the feral domestic pigs that had already colonized the southern half of the country. What came out of that crossing was worse than either parent: a hybrid that was more adaptable, more destructive, smarter, and carrying a physical resilience that made every removal method feel inadequate the second it was deployed. And here is the equation that makes the whole thing so hard. A single sow drops 2 litters a year, up to a dozen piglets each time. Left without meaningful pressure, a feral hog population can double in under 5 months. There is no plateau in that math. The number only moves one direction. The USDA now estimates the United States is home to somewhere around 6 to 7 million feral hogs. Texas alone is believed to carry roughly 2.5 million of them, spread across 253 of the state's 254 counties. The single holdout is El Paso County. That is not a wildlife management challenge. That is an occupation, and the animal doing the occupying is built for exactly that. Feral hogs sprint at 30 miles an hour. They clear 40-inch fences without breaking stride. Their tusks pass 6 inches. Their hide runs over an inch thick across the shoulders, reinforced with a layer of cartilage plating that turns light ammunition into nothing more than an inconvenience. You have to know precisely where to put your shot, and you have to be right the first time, because the animal learns from the second one. Miss the vital zone, and that hog logs your location, your scent, and your method, and it does not come back to that spot for a year. The truth the field people will tell you, once they trust you enough to say it out loud, is that you are not really hunting these animals. They are studying you, and the damage they leave is not theoretical. At a military airfield in central Texas, a group of hogs rushed the runway at dawn and forced pilots to abort takeoffs to avoid a catastrophic strike. In the Dallas suburbs, they tore golf courses apart, wrecked yards, and ripped up underground fiber optic lines worth millions. In 2019, a Texas woman was killed in a feral hog attack just outside a home, a reminder that this is not a nuisance, it is a predator with the size and temper to end a life. A single farmer in Williamson County lost 24 acres of corn in one night, $40,000 gone before sunrise. People tracking this have calculated that Texas alone absorbs more than $500 million in feral hog damage every year. And that figure only counts what can be documented. It does not count the cattle ranchers losing livestock to hog-inflicted wounds and disease. It does not count the ground-nesting bird species wiped off entire stretches of Texas ranch land because hogs rooted out every nest before the eggs could hatch. It does not touch the watershed damage from hundreds of thousands of hogs wallowing in creek beds, collapsing the banks, turning clean water into muddy runoff. The visible destruction is only the surface. What most people working this problem have never said out loud, and you need to stay with this, goes much deeper. The failure. For decades, the official response followed one script: trap them, shoot them, push them off your land and onto the next county's problem. None of it worked. Take a rancher running cattle on 740 acres of central Texas scrubland for most of his adult life. Not a man who loses his composure easily, but standing at the edge of his grain field one October morning, looking at 3 acres of corn flattened in a single night, fence posts knocked sideways, irrigation lines shredded across the dirt like cut cord. He felt something he had not felt in years. He felt like the problem was winning. He set cage traps baited with fermented corn. He brought in dog teams that worked his property for days. He hired professional removal crews who had run operations across dozens of counties. The results held for less than a week. Within days, the hogs came back. Not necessarily the same animals. Smarter ones, more cautious ones. Animals that seemed to have absorbed something from what happened and now moved around the evidence of a removal operation the way water moves around a stone. And that pattern was not unique to one ranch. It was the same story repeating across hundreds of Texas properties. The people who spent decades studying it eventually admitted, in plainer language than agencies usually allow, that there are no tools capable of winning this fight. Every traditional method produces temporary results. You catch a few hundred animals, and the ones that escape generate dozens more piglets before the next season. Every breeding cycle resets the count. If you have ever watched a problem this large get thrown billions of dollars and shrug all of it off, you already understand why this story matters. And it is exactly the kind of overlooked correction this channel exists to dig into. So subscribe and stay with me, because the thing that was actually working never showed up in a single budget line. Helicopter operations changed the scale of the effort. A flight team can sweep 400,000 acres in a matter of days and remove more hogs in one afternoon than a ground crew manages in a month. But the math never moved. Hogs breed faster than any trigger can be pulled. For every herd cleared off a ranch, 2 more drift in from the surrounding brush. The land fills back up within a season. And here is the detail that never made it into the press releases. The methods were sometimes making it worse. Heavy trapping and hunting pressure does not simply thin a hog population inside a contained area, it scatters it. Animals that survive a removal operation spread outward, pushing into counties that had been clean, setting up brand new footholds. Every helicopter run that drove a group off one property was essentially seeding the problem somewhere else. The harder the pressure, the wider the spread. The Federal Wildlife Services budget poured well over $100 million into feral hog control across a decade. The journals filled with studies, the conferences filled with presentations, and across Texas, the population kept climbing. Nobody had broken through. Not the government, not the ranchers, not the hunting industry, not the agencies. Billions a year in damage, and every available solution was producing temporary results at permanent cost. But here is what nobody sitting in those conference rooms had paused to examine. While every agency and every landowner was burning through resources trying to solve this from above, from a distance, from a line item in a budget, something else was already working the problem. At night, in the brush. No field team, no press release, not a single dollar of funding. The cameras had been recording it for years, and nobody knew what they were looking at. Not until they started paying attention to the nests. The revelation. Around 2014, field researchers working the Texas Hill Country started finding something they had no framework to explain. Feral hog nests, the shallow brushline beds where a Sioux shelters her newborn piglets, were turning up completely excavated and emptied, not triggered by hunters, not sprung by traps, physically dug out and cleared, nothing left behind but disturbed soil and silence. No blood, no drag marks, no sign of a struggle, just a hollow in the ground where a litter had been sheltered days before. A wildlife biologist who had read sign in that country for the better part of 2 decades was the one who finally crouched down next to one of those empty nests and asked the question that needed asking. Cold morning, frost still on the ground. He studied the tracks pressed into the soft soil at the edges of the site. He knew bear tracks. He knew mountain lion tracks. He knew the wide press of a large predator working a nest. These were none of those things. They were small, compact, evenly spaced. He stayed down there longer than he meant to, and he called his regional office before he ever logged the sample. Coyote tracks. Now think about that for a second. A 30-pound coyote should not register as a meaningful threat to a 200-pound feral sow. That is 6-to-1 in body weight, with tusks and cartilage armor and explosive speed all on the hog's side. On paper, it makes no biological sense, but the trail cameras were already telling a different story. The first real infrared footage out of Blanco County showed coyotes moving through the brush at 2 in the morning. This is the sequence one researcher replayed 3 times alone in an office before fully accepting it. Not scattered movement, not scavenging. Formation movement, the kind of coordinated approach that does not belong to an animal most people had written off as a glorified scavenger. The lead coyote dropped low, ears barely clearing the grass, working in from downwind so the sow could not catch the scent. Behind it, 2 more fanned into flanking positions. When the sow drifted off the nest to forage, even for a moment, they moved. One held the perimeter. One tested the piglets. Then, in a single synchronized burst, they rushed. One precise bite to the back of the neck. The piglet went limp. It was inside the tree line before the mother finished her turn. The whole sequence lasted less than 5 seconds. This was not random opportunism. This was coordinated predation, at scale, happening continuously, right under the industry's nose the entire time. And the lab work removed whatever doubt was left. Coyotes captured in active hog country were examined, and a real share of them carried fresh, undigested feral piglet tissue in their stomachs. Not old material, not scavenged off an abandoned carcass. Actively hunted. In Georgia, scat samples collected across the state turned up feral hog DNA in roughly a third of them. This was not the occasional lucky result. It was systematic, generational predation running across multiple states at once. And it had been happening for years. Nobody had been watching for it, because nobody believed it was possible. And the moment they did believe it, a harder question opened up underneath. How were 3 animals that size pulling this off at all? The hunting machine. Here is what that discovery meant for every agency, every rancher, and every helicopter crew that had spent a decade fixated on adult hogs. Every program in the country had been aimed at the same target. Adults, trapping adults, shooting adults, pushing adult herds from one property to the next. But the coyotes were not going after adults. They had found an entirely different attack vector. One no government program, no helicopter fleet, no bounty system had ever touched. They were going after what comes next, the next generation, the breeding cycle itself. The technique has a name, high-risk micropredation, and it reads like a rehearsed operation. Coyotes never take an adult hog head-on. A grown sow or boar outweighs them 6-to-1 and can gore or trample a coyote in seconds. They know it. So instead, they manufacture chaos. A lead animal sprints close enough to a nest to trigger panic, but stays too fast to be caught. The piglets scatter. The sow, 200 pounds of fury, wheels around trying to decide which way to charge, reacting to the decoy, too slow and facing the wrong threat. While she is turning, the flankers hit from both sides. One bite to the neck. They are back in cover before she finishes her rotation. By the time she returns to the nest, they are 300 yards out. And listen to how recent this is. Before 2010, there are almost no documented records of coyotes hunting in this pattern. Almost none. But trail cameras across Texas and Georgia are now catching them in coordinated groups of 3 or 4 with defined roles. One draws attention from the front. One circles left. One blocks the escape route. That is wolf-level tactical coordination from an animal most people dismiss as a trash scavenger. The adaptation runs deeper still. Most coyotes hunt at night, but specific populations in high-density hog country have shifted to early dawn, the exact window when mother hogs are most physically depleted. After a full night of foraging and rooting, the sow is at her slowest, her most exhausted, her least reactive. The coyotes found that fatigue window and learned to exploit it. They strike when the guard is lowest, when the response is slowest, when nest defense is weakest. That is not instinct. That is learned behavior passed from one generation to the next. called by one veteran researcher the most sophisticated adaptive shift he had seen in 20 years on the ground, and ecologists believe the pressure that drove it was human-made. The steady wipeout of the coyote's traditional prey base, rabbits, rodents, smaller animals, forced coyote populations across the American South to adapt or starve. And right beside them, in numbers almost beyond counting, sat the largest surplus prey supply on the continent. Unguarded piglets by the millions, overlooked by every apex predator in the ecosystem, practically invisible to every hog control program in the country. The coyotes did not overlook them. And here is what the science finally forced into the open. The animal that had been studied, trapped, and hunted for decades had run into something it could not memorize, could not outlast, and could not outbreed. Not a bullet, not a trap. But if that sounds like a theory, it is not, because the proof had been sitting in the numbers for years. Everybody had those numbers. Almost nobody was reading them right. The hidden numbers. Here is the part that should have stopped everyone cold. The data had been moving for years, and nobody was reading it correctly. In Texas, the number of piglets being killed by coyotes has climbed hard over the last 10 years. In parts of Oklahoma and Georgia, feral hog populations have actually dropped in areas with steady coyote activity. And look at what was not happening there. No traps in the ground, no helicopters in the air, no human firing a single shot. The land was quietly doing the thing every funded program had failed to do. And it gets sharper. In East Texas, a big chunk of piglets simply vanish every breeding season, and nearly every one of those losses lines up with a zone of high coyote density. When researchers finally took the coyote map and laid it right on top of the piglet death map, the lines did not roughly agree, they matched. A healthy, undisturbed coyote population was pulling off what billions of dollars in yearly human effort could not. So the people watching those numbers move started asking a question no official framework had seriously entertained. What if the fix was never going to come from above? Not from a helicopter, not from a cage trap, not from a federal budget line, but from inside the ecosystem itself. What if the land already carried its own correction, and decades of well-funded management had been quietly tearing it apart? Because here is the answer almost nobody wanted to absorb. While that natural correction was building force in the brush, public money was being spent to destroy it. For several years running, multiple states paid bounties on every coyote brought in dead. Hunters collected by the thousands. Coyote numbers in the targeted areas dropped hard. And in the counties where coyotes got knocked back the furthest, feral hog numbers surged in the years that followed. The cure was being cleared off the land by the same hand trying to fix the problem. Let that settle. While ranchers were spending fortunes on traps and helicopter flights that produced temporary results at best, the one biological force actually capable of hitting hog populations at the generational level, at the piglet level, at the exact point where the future of the population is decided, was being wiped off the map with state funding. The bounty programs were not a solution. They were accelerant poured on the fire, while the one thing capable of putting it out watched from the tree line. And the people running those programs had no way of knowing what they were doing. They were working from a model that said the only pressure that mattered was adult mortality. They had never seen the footage. They had never watched 3 coyotes dismantle a nest in under 5 seconds. They had never laid the piglet maps over the coyote maps and watched the lines snap together. They were about to find out how wrong that model was, because while the agencies argued over budgets, a handful of ranchers were quietly starting to fight this thing in a way nobody had tried before. The new war. It is 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and that same Central Texas rancher is sitting on his couch with his phone in his hand. On the screen is a live infrared feed from the north corner of his property, the same corner where 2 years earlier he watched 3 acres of corn disappear overnight. The feed shows a group of hogs moving slowly, heads down, drifting toward the center of a large enclosure. 30 animals, maybe 35, hard to count exactly on infrared. He watches them push deeper into the frame. He watches the last one clear the gate threshold. He presses one button. The gate drops. Smart traps fitted with infrared cameras, solar panels, and wireless connectivity have changed the geometry of the whole operation. He no longer sleeps in the field. He no longer pays a crew to sit in the dark. He monitors the property in real time, and closes the gate only when every animal in the group is inside. And that detail matters more than it sounds. Feral hogs are smart enough that if you trap half a group and let the other half walk, the survivors will never approach a structure like that again. They teach their offspring to avoid it. You get exactly one shot with any given group, and then the window closes for good. So he plays a longer game. He leaves the traps standing wide open for 2 full weeks before he ever arms the trigger. Corn scattered inside, no mechanism active, the thing just sitting there in the landscape. The hogs enter. They eat, they relax, they come back the next night and the night after that. They bring others. Over 14 days, every trace of suspicion dissolves and the herd decides the structure is safe. Then, on a night when the cameras show 30 or 40 animals inside at once, the gate closes. No survivors. No animals left to carry the memory of what happened there. Across rural Texas, communities are now pooling money to buy shared systems that cover multiple properties at once. Helicopter teams are running coordinated sweeps across hundreds of thousands of acres in compressed windows. The state has begun field testing specialized toxins delivered through feeders engineered to require the specific physical strength of a hog to open, leaving deer, raccoons, and other non-target species untouched. And for the first time, these programs are being built around protecting coyote populations in high-density hog country instead of clearing them out. In one South Texas coalition, ranchers combining smart traps with coyote-friendly land management watch their crop losses fall from hundreds of acres of destroyed corn a year to almost nothing. The Texas model is now being studied by wildlife agencies in Australia and New Zealand, where invasive feral pig populations are fueling their own parallel crisis. But here is what every serious researcher in this field understands, even the ones who will not say it on camera. No trap replaces what coyotes do. No helicopter matches their efficiency. No toxin runs 7 nights a week in every weather condition, hitting the exact biological vulnerability that decides the future of a hog population, which is not the adults. It was never the adults. It is the next generation. The coyotes are not a supplement to the strategy. They are the strategy. Everything else is support. And what that Blanco County footage actually showed, the footage that sent researchers back to the drawing board, the footage wildlife officials replayed, trying to make sense of what moved through the Texas brush at 2 in the morning, was not a threat. It was the answer, an answer that had been working quietly in the hill country for years, while every rancher, every agency, and every government program burned through resources looking in exactly the wrong direction. Before the helicopters, before the bounty programs, before the cage traps and the fermented corn and the federal millions, the coyote had been running its own correction program in the dark, efficiently, without a budget, hitting the precise point in the hog life cycle that no human program had ever thought to touch. And every dollar spent on bounties, every coyote brought in dead, had been cutting the line on the one mechanism that was actually winning. The most effective instrument against the most destructive invasive species in American history was never a bullet. It was never a trap, a helicopter, or a federal program. It was the animal that all of those programs spent decades trying to eliminate. The coyote, the scavenger everyone underestimated, the predator that adapted quietly, generation by generation, while we paid to wipe it out. If this changed the way you think about the predators we live alongside, and how often the real fix is the thing we are busy destroying, subscribe before you go, because what we uncover next reaches even further into the footage nobody expected to find. And tell me in the comments, should states be paying to protect coyotes instead of putting a bounty on them? I want to know where you land on that.